Hello, everybody. I didn't scare you. No. I don't know if I don't know your profiles. We try to run like a very brief survey to try to adjust the content. We didn't get enough replies, meaning that I'm going to ask you now. Your background: have you been involved with quantity surveying, takeoff? Do you model? Do you read information? You're just curious about the topic. Yes, you model. Perfect. Super. I know you, Thomas. You model. Perfect. You model as well, and you are curious about it. Perfect. We are quantity surveyors, cost specialists, and we work with the models as soon as they are available. We are gonna start talking about the important information that we give feedback at very early stages in the BIM execution plan. If you have worked with BIM execution plans, you will feel familiar with some of the sections. Of course, depends project to project. Most of them are very generic. We want to believe that it's not good enough to complain of how bad the model is for quantity takeoff if you haven't really communicated what is what you need for a takeoff. And we think that the best place to communicate that is the BIM execution plan for cost specialists. And so let's dig into that. The cost specialist needs to know what to request, but you guys need to ask. Understand that the level of maturity of the professionals working with the models doing takeoff is not is very immature yet. It's a new thing. You guys, the modeling, are moving very, very, very fast. You are learning a lot. You are implementing it in all the projects. The quantity surveyors are used to measure from 2D, and changing that mindset and that process is a very drastic change. So they will not necessarily know what they need, and they won't necessarily ask you what they need. So it's your job to actually ask them, or that will improve much more your quality of the material you produce if you ask them, what do you need? Things that we need, cost professionals, we need to know at a project level, at the very high level of the project information are, for example, how many buildings do we have in the project? Because we are going to split the cost based on the buildings. If your project has an office, a parking lot, external works for landscaping, all that will be fragmented in our cost estimates when we produce them, meaning that we need to be capable of split your quantities or split the design into these different sections. Another very important piece of information we will use, if available, is the schedule of areas. We are going to measure the area, but it's always a very, very good quality check if we have a second schedule to compare in case we have made an error measuring. Very, very, very possible as well. To agree the type of outputs, managing expectations. We work with models very early, but not all the information is going to be available very early. So we need to know what we can take into the early stages and what can we take from the 3D so we don't spend a single minute manually measuring from the drawings. The level of information, again, managing expectations. Are we going to get the trees, or are we going to get, at very early stages, or when, what format? Or you are getting all the tables in your building, or it looks like it because you are getting 5 tables, but maybe it's just that the modelers have fit out a room for the render. And when we receive those tables, we may think that we are getting all the tables in the project, but actually, no, it's just a very small, and you should ignore that and take it from the 2D. All that communication on accuracy, where do we find what, and what is the level of detail that we are receiving for each of the items, disciplines, etc. Dates for submission. We may receive some models, some drawings very early. They are for comments. And that's great, but we need to know when the model freezes. That's how we call it. When we are going to make a frozen version of the model for this phase and it's not changing. What are client deliverables and what are existing elements? So you guys will model the entire project scope for the visuals, for the tender, for whatever it is. We, as cost specialists, need to break down into different cost estimates. Some might be, what is the client going to deliver, but the contractor should not estimate. What are the existing elements in the project that are not new, that are just there, and we should not estimate them either. Otherwise, we will zoom cost unnecessarily. This seems very obvious. It's taken care at the very late stages when we send to tender. It's not so much taken care in very early stages. And this confuses us a lot. So we may be taking information very wrongly. And we may be sending estimates that are very wrong to the client, and the client may freak out because the project is over budget, whereas we may be taking the wrong scope because it's not identified yet. Okay, how it's going to change be managed in the project? What design material has preference over others? So early stages, the design might not be perfectly coordinated, but we are still looking at 2D drawings, 3D models, descriptions, and there will be classes, and there will be like incoherent information. We need to understand what takes preference. If that's the case, we will ask you guys, but it might not be so clear. So if we know that, and in case you don't have direct communication with the design team, that's great, and this should be agreed on the BIM execution plan. Definitely. What is document naming and naming conventions? You know how you named your models. You know how you named your drawings. We are producing information for the project. We are part of the BIM environment. We are part of the common data environment. We are producing documents, and we need to know how we name our cost estimates, how we name our budgets, how we name our change orders, etc. Because we are also part of the project. Trying to talk a little, Erik, so we make it more dynamic. Well, something I wanted to say is, like, we are talking a lot of the BIM execution plan. We plan to make it a bit more practical later. We will show real examples of elements in the model we receive that are not so usable. We will also talk later of some of the issues modeling that lead to totally wrong quantities for us, so that we cannot use it. That part we won't record it, so it won't be on the virtual version. But I also want to make it a little dynamic, because we are talking a lot of theory now, and it might be very boring. So if if you feel that this is not of interest to you, please let me know. We have much more content to run through, and openly, please tell me. Another of the elements that we need to discuss in the BIM execution plan and agree during the design deliveries is, how are we going to define types and subtypes in the models, in the drawings, labels, schedules. From a design perspective, it may make very much sense to split by type based on color, because it fits design purposes. From a cost perspective, the color may not be impactful, but it will be the location. So we need to know what is underground. We need to know what is overground, what is on the roof, what is inside the building, outside the building, right? We need to know if a slab it is having different type of concrete. And that will be described on the specifications, and not necessarily defining a new type or a new subtype in the model, which have different cost rates, right? We don't necessarily need to have a new totally type in a model, but we need to have that information available in the way that when we take the model information, we need to be able to split it so that we can find the quantities of each of these different parameters that are relevant from a cost perspective. These are some of them, like material strength, like the fabrication method. Most of them are taken care of in the models as a regular practice, as a normal practice. Some of them are not necessarily known. Type of surface of your materials. We will know it on later stages when we have more detail, but ideally the modelers should keep in mind what is coming in the future. So your types are not fixed early stage, and actually you start considering the different potential types and subtypes that you will have, even though it's not very clear early stages maybe. Some other type of important information, reinforcement in concrete, the location, as I mentioned before, position, is horizontal, is sloped, is a ramp, all these elements, right? Understanding the uses of the information produced in 3D. I'm focusing it on 3D, but this really applies to normal practices in the industry, to the 2D and descriptions as well, right? There might be a unique type ID in drawings, what we call labels sometimes, and it might differ from the model than from what we have in the drawings, because from facility management, it makes a lot of sense to name the equipment with different tags that are not necessarily the unique type ID that we have in the models. All these needs to be considered. Yes, the duplicated objects, super important. When we have interfaces between disciplines, which discipline is in charge of defining the insulation underground, which discipline is in charge of having the drain line around your building, is landscaping, is architectural. If this is not discussed in time, we often receive all these elements in both models, and we risk to actually take the quantity twice. Or even worse, you get different quantities from each of the models, and then you wonder which is right. Obviously, this is not wrong modeling or wrong information. It's just need to communicate what you need to look at. Right? And then in terms of the roles, the quantity surveyor or the cost specialist also needs to be defined as in the BIM execution plan with certain responsibilities. I fear that we are normally left out, and the BIM execution plan is often planned only between the designers and the client, and not necessarily the planners or the quantity surveyor or the cost specialist is involved in these matrices. This is more for quantity surveyors, so I'm going to skip it since we have a majority of designers in the room. This one?
The one that you just skipped.
Do you want me to show it? I can explain it. When we export quantities, we will get quantities directly from the model, the ones that are there, concrete volume. Now, we also have other cost elements that might not be in the model. The formwork is not in the model, so we will derive the quantity. We don't have the formwork as an element in the model, but we can calculate it based on an existing geometry. So we will derive the quantity as per the size area of your foundation, even though that element doesn't exist as a proper geometry in the model. Same applies for reinforcement. We'll say, we don't have the reinforcement in the model, but we know the volume of concrete. And we know that the engineer is telling us we will have in between 80 kilos cubic meter or 120 kilos cubic meter. We can calculate deriving it based on a quantity, meaning that if the volume of the concrete change, if the dimension of your foundation change, your formwork quantity, your reinforcement will automatically be calculated when you change that quantity. Does it make sense? Which means that we don't need to have absolutely every single bolt and piece that has a cost impact. We will work around that. based on the work that you guys are producing. That's why I was talking about managing expectations, what we will have, what we can take, and what we can work around to get where we need to be. Manual takeoff, single line diagrams, equipment list, schedules in Excel, all these things. That's manual quantity takeoff. Doesn't need to be in the model. We just need the information somewhere. So when we talk about managing information, is having the information available. Doesn't need to be a nice block in the model with all the legs of your four legs of your table. We just need a box with that information, or we just need a schedule with that information. That's also good enough. And other things that are empiric. They are not physical. Logistics, for example, time, impact of your elements in the geometry. You cannot model time. You cannot model logistics, right? You cannot model site works. So this is what will fall into other provisional allowances, contingencies. Earlier stage, we don't have all the geometries, but we need to allow some cost for what is coming. So those are the other box, right?
Obviously, yeah, sorry. Then, of course, manual takeoff is obviously quite time-consuming. So with a well-executed BIM execution plan, we would be able to take a lot of time-consuming tasks and move it up to automated takeoff, and that's what it's all about, the BIM execution plan, to have a very solid plan how to take all these time-consuming tasks up here to automated takeoff and derived takeoffs, because they can be done more or less automatic. And then there will always be some items of this, but we try to move as much of it up to automated takeoff.
If it is up to the designers, a model will never be ready for takeoff. And when I ask, I need to do the quantity take, they will tell me, no, it's not good enough. And I will cry, because I need to measure everything from 2D, which probably is also not good enough. So we understand that the quality might not be there. We just need to understand that level, right? Is 30% there, or is 80% there? Please let me know, because that saves us a lot of time. In terms of collaborating, please let me know. Do you? This is interesting, or I should go for the hands-on showing you errors in the models. It's interesting. Okay. You prefer us to go to the models? Okay. We can maybe go to the models and then jump in here. That makes sense. I'm just going to give a little work to the videographer, because we will skip from the recording the model part. Reason being is real projects, maybe from the past, but still I don't want to disclose any client information on the recording, so that makes sense, right? There we go. Yeah. Maybe I just... for example, so we are recording now. Some of the parameters we like to request for different disciplines that are not necessarily by default in Revit, but that we advise to have as part of the parameter list in the BIM execution plan are these ones. And so in this case, it will be for structural, for example, or architectural, the drawing tag. We have experienced that when the tag is assigned to an instance, it does not export in IFC. So we received 2D drawings that contain a different split of, for example, the light fixtures. They are coded as per a label, as per a tag in the 2D drawings. But then in the model, they are all called light fixtures under the same type. The way to split it by subtypes is the tag, but we don't get that in the export to IFC, meaning that as quantity surveyors, we cannot split it in the subtypes that happen. There is multiple ways to solve that, and I cannot tell you which is the best one. But just as a warning, bear this in mind if you are adding tags that are actually breaking down the elements into subtypes and that are relevant for the takeoff. Think not having it as an instance and a tag, and try to find out how to how to transfer that information to the quantity surveyor or the model user by maybe creating actual different types, if possible, in the model. Maybe one of the solutions, right? Another item is the cut length. I will explain now what is that. Generic models and caseworks are the worst enemy of the quantity surveyors. We get a box with no geometry on it, and it's bad. We get facades, modules on prefab facades as generic models, as casework. We cannot quantify the areas of those. We need to do it manually, and that's very bad. And then do not auto-generate the dimension in Revit. We advise to add these parameters so that we can actually see it. It's a custom parameter. It's not the default parameter from Revit length, area, volume. But there is a way when having generic models and casework to get this area in these dimensions actually exported. What is external and internal is very important for us, and sometimes it's not so easy to split it in the model, so that's also very beneficial to have we discussed or consider as creating different types in the models. What is a client delivery? I think I mentioned that before, so that we exclude that on the scope of what is the main contract value when we estimate. We know also what is the client delivering. What is existing or new, as we have seen on the example before. This is what I meant by drawing tags. So it may have a number 23 as the type mark as a number 23. This works. If you do it as instance, it doesn't work. Cut length, I said I will explain. When we get the total length, we get the red line, if you can see here. The quantity, you cannot see on the small one. Here is 3,931 meters for this specific beam. This is specifically very relevant when your columns or your pipes or your horizontal properties are actually sloped. There is a huge deviation in the quantities. The cut length, it is 3,667. So we are talking of 30 of difference in between in a single beam. Now, if you multiply by all your beams, if you have a huge building, that's a lot of steel that we will be over quantifying, which, is considered as an error indeed. This will be our generic models and casework example. When I get the takeoff, or when I try to do the takeoff, I get it at 0. This was pipes, specifically drain pipes modeled in the architectural model, which meant that I needed to go manually and measure it all. Yeah, but that's what I said. Like, first of all, this is concept. So if you communicate to them, they take care of it. This is concept design. I think the quality we are receiving for concept design is outstanding. It's stunning, it's just that this quality assurance, or they unknown the issue we may have. That's why we were doing this kind of session. Like, be aware of this because this has an impact to us. And there is different levels of maturity on the modeling, and we are all getting there, some faster than others, but obviously you need to deal with them all, and so do the quantity surveyors. Not all are aware of this, and they will complain, this is bad, I cannot work with this, and then it's about communicating and telling, listen, as a quantity surveyor, you need to know why this happens. It's a generic model, and you need to tell them, don't do that because it's bad for me. I cannot get the quantity. I need to manually quantify. You are putting all the effort on drawing everything for nothing. Beautiful on the picture, I cannot measure it, and it's a waste of effort, both sides. And then some more examples. Well, I was talking families, type names, the reference code that we identify in our models, correct? This is a bit more examples. I'm running a little. We are over time. I don't know. Is the speaker now here, or is just lunchtime? It's lunchtime. I'm only going to look at this and then we close it, if you agree with that. This will be the other slide that I wanted to show on parameters that are not standard in the output to IFC, or not standard in Revit, but that we advise to include them in your exports. One is the host for insulation. So we may get the entire insulation linear meters, But if we don't know what is the size of the pipe that the insulation has been installed into, we cannot guess the price. And it's not the same 1 meter big pipe than a 30 millimeters pipe, right? We get all the linear meters, you have done all the work, but if we don't get this parameter, we don't know the size. Same. This is very much noticeable in conduits and bus bars in the electrical discipline, modeling them as a generic model. So I get 1 million bus bars and 1 million conduits that actually I need to remeasure them. They are in the model, they are visible in the geometry. I cannot get any quantities for them, so it's a PT, external, internal current delivery, and underground installations, because from a cost perspective, they have an additional cost, which is excavate and backfill. So if you don't identify your underground excavations, your underground pipes from the pipes that are above your slab, we need to not manually measure, because we can, in the different softwares, you can kind of create a zone and kind of split those pipes from the others. Now the problem comes when the pipe goes all the way down and doesn't have a fitting and goes all the way down. You cannot break that quantity into 2 different quantities. So it works for most of them. It's better if the modelers define this as a parameter, because we are the quantity surveyors maybe estimating on design stage. Ideally, the way we are breaking it down and splitting it, the underground pipes from the overground pipes, is also shared with the contractor or with whoever is taking over the models later on. If we do this in our software, we cannot possibly communicate the contractor that we put the level for underground excavations here and all these quantities are from this level. They will get all the pipes with no split. They will need to do that, and hopefully they choose the same level to cut down, but it might not be. But this is it. I don't take time from your lunch, time. We are going to be on the stand in the booth if you have any more questions. We are also virtually. You have us in LinkedIn. And we run this type of presentations frequently. So also if you follow us in LinkedIn, you will see when we have webinars and things like that. Thank you very much. And I hope you learned something and you enjoyed it, and it wasn't very dense, the BIM execution plan part.